The moment my stepmom looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You won't live here anymore, but you'll keep paying up anyways," I honestly thought I'd misheard her. Because who says that out loud like it's normal? I was standing in the kitchen of the house I'd grown up in, holding a mug that suddenly felt too heavy for my hands, and all I could think was that this woman was kicking me out of my own home, but still expected me to fund her life. Was I wrong for what I did next? Or would you have snapped too if you were treated like a walking ATM instead of a human being? I guess to really understand how it got this bad, I need to go back to the beginning. Back to before my dad remarried, before that house stopped feeling like home. My mom died when I was 12. It wasn't sudden, but it was devastating. Cancer doesn't just take someone away, it slowly erases them in front of you. And I watched my dad fall apart right alongside me. For a while, it was just the two of us in that house, learning how to live in the quiet. We burned dinner together, forgot to do laundry, and sat on the couch some nights not even talking, just existing in the same space because that was easier than being alone. That house became sacred to me. Every creaky floorboard, every chipped corner of the wall held a memory of my mom laughing or yelling at us to clean up after ourselves. About 2 years later, my dad met Karen. Yeah, that's actually her name. And I swear I'm not exaggerating when I say she lived up to every stereotype. At first, she seemed fine. She smiled a lot, asked me questions about school, and told my dad how mature I was for my age. I wanted my dad to be happy, so I tried. I really did. When they got married, she moved into our house, and that's when things started to change in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. She rearranged the furniture, saying it flowed better. She packed up some of my mom's things, claiming it was time to move on. I hated it, but my dad just looked tired all the time, and I didn't want to be another burden on him. So I swallowed my feelings and kept my head down. As I got older, Karen's attitude toward me shifted. She stopped pretending we were a happy little family and started treating me like an inconvenience. She'd make comments about how much food I ate, how long my showers were, how expensive it was to keep me around. My dad would usually brush it off or tell her to relax, but he never really shut it down. I think part of him just didn't want another fight. When I turned 18, Karen sat me down and told me it was time to start contributing. She said it in this sweet, fake voice, like she was doing me a favor. I was already planning to get a job anyway, so I agreed to pay rent. It felt fair at the time, even though part of me thought it was weird to pay rent in the house my dad owned outright, and had owned long before she came along. I got a job, then another, then started college part-time. Every month, I handed over my share of rent, plus money for utilities, groceries, and sometimes extra when Karen said things were tight. Didn't question it because I trusted my dad and because I'd been raised to believe that family helps family. What I didn't realize was that Karen had started seeing my paycheck as hers. If I bought something for myself, she'd comment on how that money could have gone toward the house. If I worked extra hours, she'd say, "Good, we really need it this month." Not we as in the family, but we as in her. The real shift happened when my dad got sick. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it was serious enough that he had to stop working for a while. I stepped up without hesitation. I paid more. I covered bills. I drove him to appointments and sat in waiting rooms scrolling through my phone, praying he'd be okay. Karen, meanwhile, complained about how stressful it was for her. She'd talk about how hard it was being married to a sick man, how exhausted she was, how she deserved a break. Something about that always rubbed me the wrong way, but again, I stayed quiet. When my dad eventually recovered enough to go back to work, things didn't go back to normal. Karen had gotten used to me paying for everything. She liked it. She started talking about renovations, new appliances, vacations. If I hesitated, she'd remind me how much they'd done for me, how lucky I was to still be living at home. That phrase, still living at home, stung every time. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I was tolerated as long as my money kept flowing. The breaking point came when Karen decided my room was wasted space. She said it casually over dinner, like she was discussing the weather. She wanted to turn it into a home office and said I could sleep on the couch or figure something else out. I laughed at first because I genuinely thought she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. She looked at my dad and said, "Don't you think it's time?" My dad shifted uncomfortably and said we should talk about it later. That later never came. A week after that dinner, Karen confronted me in the kitchen. The same kitchen where she'd years later dropped that bombshell line. She told me I needed to move out by the end of the month. No discussion, no compromise. I reminded her that I was paying rent, that I was basically covering half the household expenses. That's when she said it, with this cold smile that I'll never forget. "You won't live here anymore, but you'll keep paying up anyways. You owe us. We're family." I felt my chest tighten, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I asked her if she was serious. She said of course she was. She explained that my dad needed support, and that as his child, it was my responsibility. I asked where my dad stood in all this, and she said he agreed, though she couldn't look me in the eye when she said it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment where I'd ignored my gut. By morning, I decided to talk to my dad alone. I found him in the garage, tinkering with something that didn't need fixing. When I told him what Karen had said, he went quiet. He didn't deny it. He just said Karen was stressed, and that maybe it was time for me to be on my own anyway. When I asked about the money, he sighed and said, "You know things are hard. Right now." That hurt more than anything Karen had ever said. It felt like my dad was choosing the path of least resistance, even if it meant throwing me under the bus. So that was the situation I was in, being kicked out of my own childhood, home but still expected to pay, for the privilege of not living there. Before I tell you what I did next, I want you to pause for a second and really think about it. If you were in my shoes, if your parent and step-parent treated you like this, what would you have done? Would you have kept paying to keep the peace? Or would you have finally stood up for yourself? I wish I could say I handled it calmly, but the truth is I was furious, not screaming, not throwing things, just this deep, simmering anger that made my hands shake. I went back to my room and started packing. Every shirt, every book, every little thing that was mine went into boxes. Karen watched me from the hallway with this smug expression, like she'd won. As I packed, I found old photos of my mom and me, and something inside me hardened. I realized I'd been letting this woman erase me piece by piece, just like she'd erased my mom from that house. The next day, I found an apartment. It wasn't great. It was small, smelled vaguely like old carpet, and the neighbors were loud, but it was mine. I signed the lease and paid the deposit with money I'd been saving. Money Karen probably already had plans for. When I told her I was moving out early, she looked annoyed but not surprised. When I told her I wouldn't be paying them anymore, she lost it. She accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, of abandoning my sick father. She said family doesn't do this to each other. I asked her if family kicks you out and still demands your paycheck. She had no answer for that. My dad tried to talk to me the night before I left. He said he didn't want things to end like this. I told him neither did I, but I wasn't going to be financially abused. That phrase shocked him. He said I was exaggerating. I told him to look at the bank statements, at how much I'd been giving them every month. I asked him if he thought it was fair. He didn't respond. He just looked tired again, older than I'd ever seen him. Part of me wanted to hug him and say I'd stay, that it was okay, but another part of me, the part that had been ignored for years, refused. When I moved out, I cut off the payments. Immediately, my phone blew up with messages from Karen, then from my dad, then from extended family members who'd been fed a very different version of the story. Apparently, Karen had told everyone I'd abandoned my father and left them struggling. I was painted as the villain, the ungrateful child who took advantage and then ran. It hurt, but I stuck to my decision. I sent my dad one message explaining everything, calmly and clearly, and told him I loved him but needed space. The weeks that followed were hard. I was broke, exhausted, and emotionally drained. There were nights I cried on the floor of my new apartment, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But slowly, things got better. I started sleeping through the night. I decorated my space how I wanted. I felt lighter, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. For the first time in years, my paycheck was mine. A few months later, my dad reached out. He wanted to meet. We sat in a coffee shop, awkward and quiet at first. He apologized, sort of. He said he hadn't realized how bad things had gotten, that Karen had a way of controlling situations. He admitted that losing my financial support had been a wake-up call. Apparently, Karen wasn't as interested in expensive renovations when it was coming out of her own pocket. I didn't feel victorious, just sad that it had taken this much for my dad to see me. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship now, on my terms. I don't talk to Karen at all. She's blocked everywhere. As far as I'm concerned, she made her choices. I made mine. Sometimes I still think about that house, about my mom, about what could have been different. But I don't regret leaving. I don't regret choosing myself. So that's my story. Getting kicked out of my own home and told I'd still have to pay for it was the moment I finally realized that love shouldn't come with conditions and family shouldn't feel like a transaction. If you were on my side in this, hit that like button. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure you subscribe. And seriously, tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were me, because this whole mess still blows my mind. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next story.